January 1945, Philippines jungle. A Japanese nurse whispered 4 words that would change everything. The Battle of Luzon was a meat grinder. American forces pushed north through the Philippine archipelago, reclaiming territory inch by bloody inch from Japanese defenders who had occupied the island since 1942. The jungle swallowed men whole. Artillery fire turned ancient trees into splinters. Mortar rounds cratered the earth. And in the chaos, field hospitals became graveyards. Sergeant James Callahan had seen enough death to last 3 lifetimes. At 29, the Chicago native looked a decade older. His hands, calloused and scarred, had sutured more wounds than he could count. His medical bag, worn leather cracked from humidity and blood, never left his side. Inside, sulfa drugs, morphine syrettes, bandages, and a field manual so dog-eared the pages threatened to fall out. He'd carried that bag since Guadalcanal in 1942, through Bougainville, through New Guinea, through every god-forsaken island where Americans died far from home. Doc Callahan believed in one thing above all else. A medic's oath doesn't have a nationality clause. You see someone bleeding, you stop the bleeding. You see someone dying, you fight death. Politics, propaganda, orders from officers who'd never held a dying man's hand, none of that mattered when arterial blood sprayed across your uniform. But the Pacific Theater tested that belief every single day. The Japanese didn't surrender. They fought until ammunition ran out, then charged with bayonets. When bayonets broke, they used knives. When knives were lost, they used their hands. American soldiers learned to fear wounded Japanese troops who'd detonate grenades rather than accept capture. Trust became a luxury no one could afford, and medics like Callahan found themselves treating enemies who'd rather die than accept help. On January 18, 1945, Callahan's unit, part of the 1st Cavalry Division, overran a Japanese field hospital 3 miles outside Manila. The structure barely qualified as a building. Bamboo walls, corrugated metal roof half collapsed from American artillery, dirt floor stained dark with blood. The smell hit first: gangrene, infection, death. Bodies lay in rows, some still breathing, most not. Japanese soldiers, too wounded to retreat, had been left behind. Standard practice. The Imperial Japanese Army didn't waste resources on men who couldn't fight. But something was different here. As Callahan's squad swept through the ruins, Private Miller called out, "Doc, over here. I think these are nurses." 3 women huddled in the corner of a collapsed supply room, partially buried under fallen beams and medical crates. They wore the remnants of Japanese military nurse uniforms, though the fabric was so torn and blood-stained that identification was difficult. One woman, maybe early 30s, cradled another who looked barely conscious. The third lay motionless, her breathing shallow and labored. Callahan approached slowly, hands visible, medical bag held out. The older nurse, her name tag read Yuki, positioned herself protectively in front of the others. Her eyes held no fear, only defiance. She expected execution. That's what happened to captured Japanese medical personnel. Everyone knew the stories. "I'm a medic," Callahan said, knowing she probably didn't understand English. He pointed to the red cross on his helmet, then to his bag. "I'm here to help." Yuki didn't move, but the woman she protected, younger, maybe 27, with burns covering her left arm and shoulder, opened her eyes. Her lips moved, barely audible. Callahan leaned closer. "It hurts when I breathe." Perfect English. Accented, yes, but unmistakable. Callahan froze. A Japanese nurse speaking English was unusual enough. But the way she said it, the phrasing, the desperation, it cut through every barrier the war had built. "What's your name?" Callahan asked. "Ayaka. Tanaka Ayaka." She coughed, and blood flecked her lips. "Please, help them. Not me. Them." Callahan had been a medic long enough to recognize pneumonia. The rattling breath, the fever flush on her cheeks despite the pallor of blood loss, the way she struggled for each word. Add burns, dehydration, probable malnutrition, and she had maybe 48 hours, less if infection set in. He turned to Private Miller. Get Captain Morrison. Tell him we've got wounded Japanese medical personnel, and bring my full kit from the jeep. Miller hesitated. Doc, are you sure? I mean, they're wounded, that's all I need to know. Go. As Miller ran off, Callahan began his assessment. The third nurse, Hana, had a compound fracture in her left leg and was unconscious from shock. Yuki had shrapnel wounds across her back, infected but not immediately life-threatening. But Ayaka was critical. Second-degree burns covered 30% of her body. Her temperature had to be at least 104 degrees, and that breathing. Each inhalation sounded like broken glass scraping against metal. How long have you been here? Callahan asked as he checked Ayaka's pulse. Thready, rapid, weak. 4 days, maybe 5. Lost count. Ayaka's eyes focused on him with surprising clarity. You are... 1st Cavalry? I saw... your patches. That's right. How do you know our unit insignia? Ayaka's lips curved into something that might have been a smile if she'd had the strength. We treated your soldiers before retreat. Callahan's hand stopped moving. What did you say? American prisoners, wounded. We treated them. She coughed again, harder this time. Against orders, but we are nurses. We heal. Private Miller returned with Captain Morrison, a by-the-book intelligence officer from Boston who'd never met a regulation he didn't love. Morrison took one look at the 3 Japanese women, and his expression hardened. Sergeant Callahan, step away from the prisoners. Sir, they're critically wounded. This one has pneumonia and burns. She needs immediate... I said step away, Sergeant. These are enemy combatants. They'll be interrogated, then transferred to a POW facility. Sir, she won't survive interrogation. She needs sulfa drugs, IV fluids, wound cleaning, and oxygen support. She needs it now. Morrison's jaw tightened. Your concern is noted, but intelligence takes priority. We need to know what they know about Japanese positions, troop movements, supply lines. After interrogation, you can provide basic stabilization. After interrogation, she'll be dead. That's not your call to make, Sergeant. The standoff lasted maybe 10 seconds, but it felt like an hour. Other soldiers had gathered, drawn by the commotion. Sergeant Davis, a veteran from the Bataan campaign, spat on the ground near the nurses. My brother died in the death march, Davis said, his voice low and dangerous. 70 miles in the sun. No water, no food. Japanese guards bayoneted anyone who fell. You want to save these people, Doc? After what they did to us? Callahan understood the anger. He'd treated survivors of Bataan, seen the scars, heard the stories. The Japanese military had committed atrocities that defied comprehension. But these 3 women huddled in the ruins weren't the architects of those horrors. They were nurses, and if what Ayaka said was true, they'd risk their lives to help American prisoners. Sir, Callahan said carefully, she claims they treated American POWs. If that's true, we need to verify it, and we need her alive to do that. Morrison considered this. Intelligence value. That was the language officers understood. Can you stabilize her enough for questioning? I can try, but I need to start now. You have 30 minutes, then I'm bringing in the interrogators. It wasn't enough time, not even close. But it was something. Callahan knelt beside Ayaka and opened his medical bag. As he prepared a sulfa drug injection, he noticed something odd. Bandages on his own uniform. Not his bandages, he knew his own supplies. These were different, rougher material. Improvised. He looked around the ruined hospital. In the corner, partially hidden under debris, he found what he was looking for. American dog tags, dozens of them arranged carefully on a makeshift table. Next to them, medical records written in a mixture of Japanese and broken English. Private Miller, bring me those records. Miller retrieved the papers, and Callahan began reading. His hands started shaking halfway through the first page. Private First Class Robert Chen, gunshot wound left shoulder, treated January 10th, stable condition, transferred to... The handwriting became harder to read. Transferred to safe location. Another page. Corporal James Mitchell, shrapnel wounds, abdomen and legs. Treated January 11th, critical, requires surgery, performed emergency procedure, survived. Page after page, 12 American soldiers, all treated, all documented. And the handwriting matched across all the records, small, precise, careful. Ayaka's handwriting. Callahan looked at the dog tags again. His unit's identification numbers. Men from his own division. Men who'd been listed as missing in action after a Japanese ambush 2 weeks ago. Men everyone assumed were dead. "Sir," Callahan called to Captain Morrison, "you need to see this." Morrison read the records in silence. When he finished, he looked at Ayaka with an expression Callahan couldn't quite identify. Surprise, respect, confusion. "Where are these men now?" Morrison demanded. Ayaka struggled to speak. "Hidden, in village, 3 kilometers north. Told them, wait for Americans. Gave them civilian clothes." "Why?" Morrison's question came out sharper than probably intended. "Why risk your life for enemy soldiers? Not enemies." Ayaka's voice was barely a whisper now. "Wounded, that is all. Just wounded?" Nurse Yuki spoke for the first time, her English heavily accented but understandable. "Ayaka-san saved American pilot too, 3 weeks ago, hid him from Kempe-tai. They would have executed him. She forged papers, said he was Korean laborer." Morrison's radio operator had been listening. "Sir, we've got a Lieutenant Robert Chen at the base hospital, fighter pilot, shot down near Manila in December. He was recovered by Filipino resistance fighters who said a Japanese nurse helped him." The pieces clicked together. Callahan watched Morrison's face as the intelligence officer processed this information. These weren't just enemy combatants. They were medical personnel who'd violated their own military's orders to save American lives. And now they were dying in the ruins of a hospital, abandoned by their own army. "Sergeant Callahan," Morrison said slowly, "you have authorization to provide full medical treatment. I'll radio headquarters for verification on Lieutenant Chen's story. If it checks out..." He paused. "If it checks out, these women are under American protection." Callahan didn't wait for Morrison to change his mind. He'd already prepared the sulfa drug injection. As he administered it to Ayaka, he explained what he was doing, more out of habit than necessity. "This is sulfanilamide. It'll fight the infection in your lungs. You're going to feel a burning sensation, but that's normal. I'm also going to start an IV for fluids. You're severely dehydrated." Ayaka nodded weakly. "Thank you. I thought you would..." "Kill you?" Callahan finished. "I'm a medic. I don't kill. I save lives, even when it's complicated." "Complicated." Ayaka almost laughed, but it turned into a coughing fit. "Yes, very complicated." As Callahan worked, cleaning Ayaka's burns and setting up the IV, he felt the weight of dozens of eyes on him. Some soldiers watched with curiosity, others with barely concealed anger. Sergeant Davis stood apart, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. The sun was setting when Callahan finished the initial treatment. Ayaka's fever had dropped slightly, and her breathing, while still labored, had improved. Yuki and Hana were stabilized. All 3 would survive the night, maybe longer. But as darkness fell and the temperature dropped, Callahan faced a new problem. Tropical Philippines could be brutally hot during the day, but nights in January could dip into the 50s. For someone with pneumonia and burns, that kind of cold could be fatal. Ayaka needed warmth. She needed protection from the elements. The ruined hospital offered no shelter. The roof was gone. The walls provided minimal wind protection. And Callahan's medical supplies didn't include blankets. Those had been used up days ago on American wounded. He looked at Ayaka, shivering despite the fever, her burned skin vulnerable to infection from exposure. He thought about the American soldiers she'd saved, men from his own unit, men who were alive because this Japanese nurse had chosen compassion over orders. Callahan made his decision. He removed his field jacket, the one with his sergeant stripes clearly visible, the one with his unit patch, the one that identified him as American military. Removing it in front of enemy prisoners violated about 6 different regulations. Exposing rank insignia could provide valuable intelligence, but regulations didn't account for moments like this. He placed the jacket over Ayaka, tucking it around her shoulders. The jacket was too big, swallowing her small frame, but it was warm and dry. Ayaka's eyes opened, confused. "Your coat," she whispered. "You will be cold." "I'll be fine. You need it more than I do." Nurse Yuki, watching from a few feet away, began to cry. Not loud sobs, just silent tears streaming down her face. She bowed her head, a gesture of profound respect and gratitude. "Arigato gozaimasu," Yuki said. "Thank you. Thank you." Sergeant Davis saw the whole thing. He stared at Callahan for a long moment, then turned and walked away. Callahan expected anger, maybe a report to Morrison. Instead, Davis returned 10 minutes later with 2 blankets. "For the other 2, Davis said gruffly, not meeting Callahan's eyes. He dropped the blankets next to Yuki and Hana, then left without another word. Private Miller approached cautiously. "Doc, you didn't have to." "Yes, I did," Callahan said simply. "She saved our men. What else could I do?" The night passed slowly. Callahan stayed with the 3 nurses, monitoring their conditions, adjusting IVs, administering medication. Around midnight, Ayaka's fever spiked again. She became delirious, speaking rapidly in Japanese, occasionally switching to English. "The pilot," she mumbled. "Have to hide the pilot. Kempitai coming. Have to. "The pilot is safe," Callahan assured her, wiping her forehead with a damp cloth. "Lieutenant Chen is alive. He's at our base hospital. You saved him." "Saved him." Ayaka's eyes focused briefly, but couldn't save Kenji. "Who's Kenji?" "My fiancé, killed in Tokyo, American bombing, March 1944. Tears leaked from the corners of her eyes. "I was so angry at Americans, at the war, at everything." Callahan said nothing. What could he say? American B-29s had firebombed Tokyo, killing thousands of civilians. Ayaka had every right to hate Americans, every reason to let captured American soldiers die. But she hadn't. "Why did you help them?" Callahan asked quietly. "After what happened to Kenji, why did you save American soldiers?" Ayaka was silent for so long that Callahan thought she'd fallen asleep. Then, barely audible, she answered, "Because Kenji was a doctor. He believed that healing has no borders, that suffering is suffering no matter whose side you're on." She coughed, and Callahan helped her sit up slightly. "When I saw the American soldiers, wounded and afraid, I thought, what would Kenji do? And I knew. He would help them. So I did. Even though it meant you could be executed for treason? Yes. Because if I let them die, if I chose revenge over healing, then Kenji's death meant nothing. The war would have taken him and taken my humanity too. I couldn't let that happen." Callahan felt something break inside his chest. For 3 years, he'd fought in the Pacific. He'd seen Japanese soldiers commit atrocities. He'd treated American boys who'd been tortured, starved, brutalized. He'd learned to see the enemy as something less than human, because that was the only way to survive the horror. But Ayaka wasn't less than human. She was a nurse who'd lost the man she loved and still chose compassion. She was a woman who'd risked everything to save enemy soldiers because her oath as a healer mattered more than her grief. She was, in every way that counted, exactly like him. "You're a better person than I am," Callahan said. "No." Ayaka's hand, weak and trembling, reached out and touched his arm. "You gave me your coat. You are treating me when your own soldiers want me dead. We are the same. We both chose to heal." By dawn, Ayaka's condition had stabilized enough for Captain Morrison to conduct a brief interview. He kept it short, professional, focused on verifying the information about the hidden American soldiers. Ayaka provided coordinates, descriptions, the names she remembered. Morrison radioed the information to headquarters. 3 hours later, a patrol returned with 12 American soldiers. Alive. Malnourished and injured, but alive. Men who'd been listed as killed in action. Men whose families had received telegrams saying their sons, brothers, husbands weren't coming home. And now they were back. Because a Japanese nurse had chosen mercy over orders. Private First Class Robert Chen was among them, his shoulder still bandaged from the gunshot wound Ayaka had treated. When he saw the 3 nurses, he broke down completely. He tried to approach Ayaka, but the guards stopped him. "That woman saved my life," Chen said, his voice breaking. "I was bleeding out in the jungle. She found me, treated me, hid me from Japanese military police for 3 weeks. She could have been executed. She should have been executed. But she did it anyway." Captain Morrison's report to headquarters was unusually detailed. He documented everything. The medical records, the rescued American soldiers, Lieutenant Chen's testimony, the evidence of the nurses' actions. He recommended that Ayaka, Yuki, and Hana be classified as protected medical personnel under the Geneva Convention and granted clemency. The recommendation was approved. Instead of being sent to a standard POW camp, the 3 nurses were transferred to a medical facility, where they could receive proper treatment and recover under supervision. Callahan continued to oversee their care for the next 2 weeks, until his unit received orders to move north toward Manila. The day before his departure, Callahan visited Ayaka one final time. She was sitting up now, her burns healing, her breathing almost normal. The pneumonia had retreated. She would survive. "I came to get my coat back," Callahan said, though he made no move to take it. Ayaka still wore it, wrapped around her shoulders like a protective shield. "Keep it," Ayaka said. "Please. So you remember." "Remember what?" "That enemies can become friends, that the war doesn't have to win, that we chose differently." She folded the coat carefully and handed it to him. "When you go home, when you think about this war, remember that a Japanese nurse and an American medic both chose to heal. Remember that it's possible." Callahan took the coat, feeling the weight of it differently now. It wasn't just fabric and buttons. It was a symbol of something larger, the possibility of humanity in the midst of inhumanity, the choice to see people instead of enemies. "I'll remember," he promised. "I'll never forget." They never saw each other again, not for 42 years. The war ended 8 months later. Japan surrendered in August 1945 after atomic bombs destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The Pacific Theater, which had consumed so many lives and so much suffering, finally went silent. Soldiers went home, prisoners were repatriated, and the stories of what happened in the jungle, in the field hospitals, in the moments between battles, those stories were filed away, classified, forgotten. Callahan returned to Chicago in October 1945. He'd survived 4 years of combat without serious injury, a statistical miracle. He enrolled in medical school on the GI Bill, became a doctor, opened a practice on the South Side. He married, had 3 children, lived a normal life. But he never forgot the Philippines, never forgot Ayaka. He kept the medical records he'd found in that ruined hospital, kept Ayaka's careful notes documenting the American soldiers she'd saved, kept his field jacket, the one he'd given her that cold January night. He tried to find her through official channels, letters to the Red Cross, inquiries to the Japanese government, requests through military archives. Nothing. No record of Nurse Tanaka Ayaka. No information about what happened to her after repatriation. The Cold War made such searches difficult. Japan was rebuilding, focused on the future, not eager to revisit the complicated moral landscape of the war. And in America, anti-Japanese sentiment lingered. The internment camps, the propaganda, the deep wounds of Pearl Harbor and Bataan, those didn't heal quickly. Stories about Japanese compassion, about enemy soldiers showing mercy, didn't fit the narrative either country wanted to tell. So Callahan stayed silent. He told his wife, told his children, but never spoke publicly about what happened. The coat stayed in his closet, wrapped in plastic, preserved, a secret memorial to a moment of humanity that the world wasn't ready to acknowledge. Decades passed. Callahan's children grew up. His medical practice thrived. He trained young doctors, emphasizing the importance of seeing patients as people first, diagnoses second. He volunteered with Doctors Without Borders in the 1970s, traveling to conflict zones, treating whoever needed treatment regardless of politics. His philosophy never changed. A medic's oath doesn't have a nationality clause. In 1985, 40 years after the war ended, a historian named Dr. Sarah Mitchell contacted Callahan. She was researching declassified documents from the Pacific Theater, focusing on medical personnel and POW treatment. She'd found Captain Morrison's report about 3 Japanese nurses who'd treated American prisoners. The report mentioned Sergeant James Callahan by name. "I'm trying to find people who were there," Dr. Mitchell explained over the phone. "People who can verify these accounts. The official records are sparse, and I want to make sure I get the story right." Callahan was 69 years old. His hands, which had sutured so many wounds, trembled slightly from age. But his memory of that January night in 1945 was crystal clear. "I was there," he said. "I remember everything." The interview took 6 hours. Callahan showed Dr. Mitchell the medical records, the field jacket, the notes he'd kept for 4 decades. He told her about Ayaka's whispered words, "It hurts when I breathe," and how those 4 words had changed everything. He described the decision to give her his coat, the anger from other soldiers, the rescued American POWs, the moment he realized that the enemy nurse was more committed to healing than he'd ever been. "Do you know what happened to her?" Callahan asked. "To Ayaka?" Dr. Mitchell shook her head. "The Japanese records from that period are incomplete. Many were destroyed during the occupation. But I can try to find her. If she's still alive, if she's willing to talk, would you want to meet her?" "More than anything." It took 2 years. Dr. Mitchell worked with Japanese researchers, combed through repatriation records, contacted veterans organizations, followed every lead. In 1987, she found a woman named Tanaka Ayaka, living in Kyoto. Age 69, former military nurse, retired from civilian nursing in 1980, never married. Dr. Mitchell made contact carefully, explaining her research, asking if this Tanaka Ayaka was the same nurse who'd been captured in the Philippines in January 1945. The response came 3 weeks later. Yes, she was the one. And yes, she remembered the American medic who'd given her his coat. Callahan wrote a letter. He didn't know what to say, how to compress 42 years of memory and gratitude into words. He settled for simple honesty. "Dear Ayaka, I don't know if you remember me. I was the medic who treated you in January 1945, after we found you in the field hospital. You told me it hurt when you breathed, and I gave you my coat. You saved 12 American soldiers, including men from my own unit. You saved a pilot named Robert Chen. You risked your life to heal people who were supposed to be your enemies. I never forgot you. I never forgot what you taught me about compassion and courage. I've spent 42 years wondering if you survived, if you made it home, if you found peace. I hope this letter finds you well. If you're willing, I would very much like to see you again. Respectfully, James Callahan." Ayaka's response arrived 6 weeks later. Her English had improved significantly over the decades, though she apologized for any mistakes. "Dear James, of course I remember you. I remember your hands, gentle even though they were scarred from war. I remember your voice, calm when I was dying. I remember your coat, warm when I was cold. I remember thinking that if an American soldier could show me mercy, then perhaps the world wasn't entirely broken. You asked if I found peace. The answer is complicated. I returned to Japan in 1946. My family was gone, killed in the Tokyo fire bombings. I had no home, no future, only memories of war. But I had my training. I had my oath as a nurse. So I worked. I opened a clinic in Kyoto for Hibakusha, the atomic bomb survivors. I treated people who'd been burned, poisoned, destroyed by the same country whose soldier once gave me his coat. The irony wasn't lost on me. I never married. Kenji was the only man I ever loved, and he died in 1944. But I had purpose. I had patience. I had the memory of that night when you chose to see me as human. That memory sustained me through very dark times. Yes, I would like to see you again. Please come to Japan. We have much to discuss. With gratitude, Ayaka. Callahan booked a flight to Japan 3 days later. His wife insisted on coming with him, understanding that this journey was something her husband needed to complete. They arrived in Kyoto in November 1987, 42 years and 10 months after that January night in the Philippines. Ayaka met them at a small tea house near the Kamo River. Callahan almost didn't recognize her. The young nurse with burns and fever had become an elderly woman with silver hair and gentle eyes. But when she smiled, he saw the same person who'd whispered, "It hurts when I breathe," and changed his understanding of what it meant to be human. They sat across from each other, two people in their late 60s who'd once been enemies, and they talked about the war, about the years after, about the choices they'd made and the lives they'd lived. Ayaka told him about her clinic, about the thousands of patients she'd treated, about her work with Japanese-American reconciliation groups. Callahan told her about his medical practice, his work with Doctors Without Borders, his efforts to train combat medics in the ethics of care. "I kept your coat," Ayaka said quietly. "I know I told you to keep it, but when they transferred me to the repatriation center, I asked if I could have it back. The American officer in charge said yes. I've preserved it all these years. Would you like to see it?" She brought out a carefully wrapped package. Inside, protected by layers of acid-free paper, was Callahan's field jacket. 42 years old, but maintained with meticulous care. The sergeant's stripes were still visible. The 1st Cavalry Division patch was intact. Even the bloodstains, Ayaka's blood from that night, had been preserved. "This coat saved my life," Ayaka said, "not just because it kept me warm, because it showed me that compassion could survive war, that a soldier could choose mercy over revenge, that healing could transcend hatred. I couldn't let it be lost." Callahan touched the fabric, remembering. "You saved 12 men. You risked execution to help enemy soldiers. I just gave you a coat. You gave me more than a coat. You gave me hope. You proved that my choice to help those American soldiers wasn't foolish or naive. You proved that on the other side, there were people like you who understood what I was trying to do. That mattered more than you know." They spent 3 days together in Kyoto. Ayaka showed them her clinic, introduced them to former patients, shared her life's work. Callahan met Japanese veterans who'd also struggled with the moral complexity of the war, who'd also chosen compassion over hatred in small, quiet ways that history never recorded. On the final day, Ayaka gave Callahan a gift, a memoir she'd written, never published, documenting her experiences as a military nurse. The title was simple: "It Hurts When I Breathe, A Nurse's War." "I wrote this for my patients," Ayaka explained, "to help them understand that suffering is universal, that the people who hurt us are also people who hurt, that healing requires us to see beyond sides and nations. But I think you should have it. You're part of this story." Callahan read the memoir on the flight home. Ayaka's account of the war was unflinching. The brutality she witnessed, the impossible choices she faced, the trauma that never fully healed. But woven through the darkness were moments of light. Japanese soldiers who showed mercy to civilians, American prisoners who thanked their captors for small kindnesses. And that night in January 1945, when an American medic gave a dying enemy nurse his coat, Ayaka had written, "In war, we are taught to see enemies. But Sergeant Callahan taught me that we can choose to see people instead. That choice, made in a moment of crisis, can echo through decades. It certainly echoed through mine." Dr. Sarah Mitchell published her research in 1989. Her book, Compassion in Conflict: Medical Personnel in the Pacific Theater, included extensive interviews with Callahan and Ayaka. The story of the coat became one of the book's central narratives, a symbol of humanity's persistence, even in war's darkest moments. The book attracted attention. Veterans organizations invited Callahan to speak. Peace advocacy groups asked Ayaka to share her story. Media outlets covered the reunion of the American medic and the Japanese nurse, and slowly, other stories emerged. Dozens of similar accounts. Enemy medical personnel who'd treated each other's wounded, soldiers who'd shown mercy when orders demanded cruelty, moments of compassion that had been hidden for decades. The Smithsonian Institution contacted Callahan in 1995. They were creating an exhibition called Compassion in Conflict, Stories of Humanity in Wabi-Woud. They wanted to include the coat. Ayaka agreed immediately, on one condition, that the exhibition tell the complete story, including the 12 American soldiers she'd saved and the Japanese fiancé she'd lost. The coat went on display in 1996, mounted in a climate-controlled case, accompanied by photographs, documents, and video interviews with Callahan and Ayaka. The placard read, "This field jacket, worn by U.S. Army Sergeant James Callahan, was given to Japanese Army nurse Tanaka Ayaka in January 1945. Despite being enemies, both chose to honor their oaths as medical professionals above military orders. This coat represents the possibility of compassion even in war's darkest moments." The exhibition drew thousands of visitors. Veterans wept in front of the display. Students asked questions about moral courage. Families of Wabi-Wou's soldiers shared their own stories of unexpected mercy and hidden humanity. The coat became more than a historical artifact. It became a reminder that individuals can choose differently, even when systems demand dehumanization. Callahan and Ayaka remained in contact for the rest of their lives. They exchanged letters, spoke on the phone, visited each other when health permitted. They became advocates together, speaking at universities, medical schools, peace conferences. Their message was consistent. War creates enemies, but compassion creates humans. In 2001, James Callahan died at age 85. His obituary in the Chicago Tribune mentioned his medical career, his family, and his service in Wabi-Wou. But the final paragraph noted, "Dr. Callahan believed that a medic's oath transcends nationality. He lived that belief every day of his life, from a jungle in the Philippines to the streets of Chicago. He will be remembered not just for the lives he saved, but for the humanity he preserved." Ayaka attended the funeral, traveling from Japan despite her own failing health. She placed a white chrysanthemum on Callahan's casket and whispered words only she could hear. Later she told Callahan's children, "Your father taught me that enemies are only enemies until someone chooses to see them differently. He chose to see me as a person who needed help. That choice saved my life and gave me a reason to keep living. I will be grateful until my last breath." Tanaka Ayaka died in 2003 at age 85. Her obituary in the Kyoto Shimbun described her decades of work with atomic bomb survivors, her advocacy for peace, and her role in Japanese-American reconciliation. The final paragraph read, "Tanaka-san believed that healing has no borders. She demonstrated this belief through her actions in war and her service in peace. She will be remembered as a woman who chose compassion over hatred, even when hatred would have been easier." The coat remains in the Smithsonian. Visitors still stop to read the story, to look at the worn fabric and faded patches, to contemplate what it means to choose mercy in a moment of crisis. School groups study it as part of lessons on moral courage. Veterans bring their grandchildren to show them that war is more complicated than heroes and villains. In 2015, 70 years after that January night in the Philippines, the Smithsonian hosted a special commemoration. Lieutenant Robert Chen, 92 years old and one of the last surviving soldiers Ayaka had saved, attended. He stood in front of the coat display and told his story to a crowd of journalists, historians, and students. "I was 23 years old when I was shot down," Chen said, his voice still strong despite his age. "I thought I was dead. Japanese military police were hunting for me. I'd heard the stories about what they did to captured pilots. Then this nurse found me. She was small, couldn't have weighed more than 100 pounds, but she dragged me into a storage shed and treated my wounds. She brought me food, water, antibiotics. She forged documents saying I was a Korean laborer. For 3 weeks, she risked her life every single day to keep me alive. Chen paused, emotion overtaking him. When I asked her why she would do this for an enemy, she said something I've never forgotten. She said, "You are not my enemy. You are a wounded man. That is all I need to know." That's what Nurse Tanaka taught me. That's what Sergeant Callahan understood. That our common humanity matters more than our differences. The audience was silent. Chen approached the display case, placed his hand on the glass near the coat. "This jacket represents the best of what we can be," he continued. "Not the worst of war, but the best of humanity. Two people who should have been enemies, who had every reason to hate each other, who chose compassion instead. They chose to heal, and because they made that choice, I'm standing here today. My children exist because of that choice. My grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, they're all here because a Japanese nurse and an American medic decided that healing mattered more than hatred." Chen lived until 2018, dying at age 95. His family donated his personal papers to the Smithsonian, including a letter Ayaka had written to him in 1987. In it, she'd said, "I often think about the young pilot I hid in 1945. I wonder if saving one life made any difference in a war that killed millions. But then I remember what my fiancé Kenji used to say. We cannot stop the ocean, but we can save the person drowning in front of us." "You were drowning, Lieutenant Chen. I am glad I could help you reach the shore." The exhibition, Compassion in Conflict, became permanent. The coat, now over 75 years old, remains carefully preserved. Conservation experts monitor its condition, ensuring that future generations can see this tangible reminder of what happened in a Philippine jungle in January 1945. Visitors come from around the world. Japanese tourists stand beside American veterans. Former enemies, now allies, contemplate the same artifact and draw the same conclusion: that individuals can transcend the systems that try to make them hate. A high school teacher from Seattle brings her students every year. She has them read excerpts from Ayaka's memoir and Callahan's interviews. Then she asks them a question. What would you do in Sergeant Callahan's position? Would you give your coat to someone you'd been taught to see as the enemy? The answers vary. Some students say yes immediately, moved by the story's emotional power. Others hesitate, acknowledging the complexity, the anger of soldiers like Sergeant Davis who'd lost brothers to Japanese brutality. A few admit they don't know, that it's easy to claim moral courage from the safety of a classroom. Harder to demonstrate it when lives hang in the balance. That's the right answer, the teacher tells them. I don't know either. None of us know what we'd do until we're in that moment. But what we can do is prepare ourselves. We can practice seeing people instead of enemies. We can choose compassion in small ways every day, so that when the big moment comes, when someone whispers, "It hurts when I breathe," we're ready to respond with humanity instead of hatred. The coat has become a teaching tool. Medical schools use it in ethics courses, discussing the obligations of healthcare providers in conflict zones. Military academies analyze Callahan's decision, debating the balance between following orders and following conscience. Peace studies programs examine it as evidence that reconciliation is possible, even after the most brutal conflicts. But perhaps the coat's most important audience is the ordinary visitors who stop, read the placard, and stand quietly for a moment. They're not historians or ethicists or military strategists. They're people trying to make sense of a world that still produces enemies, still demands we choose sides, still makes compassion feel like a luxury we can't afford. The coat tells them something different. It says that compassion is not a luxury. It's a choice that one medic made on a cold January night when he could have walked away, could have followed orders, could have let hatred win. Instead, he removed his coat and placed it on the shoulders of a dying enemy nurse. And that choice echoed through 75 years, touching thousands of lives, proving that humanity can survive even war's attempt to destroy it. In the museum's guest book, visitors leave comments. A veteran from Iraq writes, "I treated enemy wounded in Fallujah. My squad thought I was crazy. This coat helps me know I wasn't." A nurse from Syria writes, I have treated people from all sides of our civil war. Sometimes I feel alone in believing that all lives matter. This story reminds me I'm not alone. A student from Japan writes, "My great-grandmother was a military nurse in WU. She never talked about what she experienced. I wish I could have told her about Tanaka Ayaka. I wish she'd known she wasn't the only one who chose compassion." The comments fill dozens of volumes now, stored in the Smithsonian's archives. They're a testament to the quote's continuing relevance, its ability to speak across decades and cultures and conflicts. Because the question it poses, will you choose to see the humanity in your enemy, never becomes outdated. Every generation faces that question. Every individual must answer it. James Callahan answered it in January 1945, when he gave his coat to Ayaka. Ayaka answered it when she saved 12 American soldiers despite losing her fiancé to American bombs. Lieutenant Chen answered it when he spoke publicly about the Japanese nurse who saved his life, even though some veterans criticized him for sympathizing with the enemy. Sergeant Davis answered it when he brought blankets for the other two nurses, choosing mercy over the rage he felt about his brother's death. These weren't perfect people. They made mistakes, harbored prejudices, struggled with anger and grief and trauma. But in critical moments, they chose to act with compassion. They chose to heal instead of harm. They chose to see people instead of enemies. That's what the coat represents. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of choice. Not the erasure of differences, but the recognition of shared humanity. Not the claim that war is anything other than horror, but the insistence that even in horror, individuals can choose differently. 79 years after that January night, the coat remains. Fabric worn thin in places, colors faded, patches carefully preserved. It's just a jacket. But it's also a promise that compassion is possible, that enemies can become friends, that healing can transcend hatred. When visitors ask museum staff why this particular artifact matters so much, why a simple field jacket deserves such prominent display, the answer is always the same. Because it proves that we can choose. In the worst circumstances imaginable, when every system and structure and social pressure demands that we dehumanize the other, we can still choose to see people. We can still choose to heal. We can still choose to give our coat to someone who's cold, even if that someone is supposed to be our enemy. "It hurts when I breathe," Ayaka whispered in January 1945. And an American medic, who had every reason to walk away, every justification to follow orders, every excuse to let hatred win, made a different choice. He removed his coat. He provided treatment. He chose compassion. That choice saved Ayaka's life. But it did something more. It proved that even in war's darkest moments, humanity can survive. That individuals can transcend the systems that try to make them cruel. That a medic's oath, to heal, to help, to see suffering and respond with care, really doesn't have a nationality clause. The coat hangs in the Smithsonian, silent witness to a moment of grace in the midst of brutality. It asks nothing of visitors except that they consider what they would do. Would they give their coat? Would they choose compassion? Would they see the person instead of the enemy? The answer matters. Because somewhere, right now, someone is whispering, "It hurts when I breathe." And someone else must decide how to respond. Will they walk away? Will they follow orders? Will they let hatred win? Or will they remember a medic named James Callahan and a nurse named Tanaka Ayaka, two people who should have been enemies, who chose to be healers instead? Will they remember that compassion is always possible, always meaningful, always worth the cost? The coat can't answer these questions. Only individuals can. But it stands as evidence that the right answer exists, that people have chosen compassion before, that humanity can survive even when everything conspires to destroy it. In a world that still produces enemies, still demands we choose sides, still makes hatred feel justified, the coat offers a different path. Not an easy path. Callahan faced criticism. Ayaka risked execution. Both carried the weight of their choices for decades. But a possible path, a human path. "It hurts when I breathe," she said. And he gave her his coat. That's the whole story. That's everything that matters. Two people, in the worst circumstances imaginable, choosing to see each other's humanity, choosing to heal instead of harm, choosing compassion over hatred. The coat remains preserved and protected, a reminder that such choices are always possible, always necessary, always worth making. Because in the end, we are all just people who hurt when we breathe. And we all need someone willing to give us their coat. If this story moved you, subscribe to our channel for more untold stories of humanity in history's darkest moments. Hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. Would you have given your coat? Your engagement helps us bring these forgotten heroes to light.